Citizens arrests in California. So, bounty hunters are private citizens. When a bounty hunter makes an arrest, they're acting as a citizen. They're making a citizen's arrest. Even though they have all this training, assuming that a bounty hunter has all that training that's outlined in PC 1299, you're still acting as a citizen. So citizens in the state of California can make private persons arrests. Citizens cannot detain. That's very important to understand, because only cops can detain, right? When they're investigating a situation, police officers can place a person in handcuffs to detain them. That's not making an arrest. An arrest is when you bring somebody up on charges. You're charging them with an offense that's in violation of usually what is the California Penal Code, if you're in California. But to detain somebody is something completely different. All right, so you cannot, as a bounty hunter, detain anybody. You're making an arrest, right? You can't go after a fugitive, and let's say they have associates and friends and accomplices around them. You can't just start hooking everybody up and detaining them until you figure things out. That's bounty hunters don't do that. A bounty hunter knows who they're after. They confirm that person who's a fugitive really is the fugitive. They confirm their warrants are still active. They have all their paperwork right, and they make arrests. The citizen's arrest, but we don't detain. California Penal Code 837 allows for private persons to make a citizen's arrest and states a private person may arrest another for a public offense committed or attempted in his presence, when the person arrested has committed a felony although not in his presence, and when that felony has been in fact committed and he has reasonable cause for believing the person arrested to have committed it. As a private citizen, you can arrest somebody if they commit a misdemeanor or felony in your presence, or if somebody commits a felony that's outside of your presence, but you have to have reasonable cause. What you can do as a bounty hunter is arrest someone on a warrant that they have, because you have the bond paperwork, which shows that your fugitive entered into an agreement with the bail company that hired you as a bounty hunter. All right, so we'll get more into that and private property rights, things of that nature. Bail bond paperwork creates the conditions necessary for a person engaged in bounty hunting to justify their arrest of a fugitive. So again, your bail bond paperwork is not a warrant. The fugitive already has a warrant. The bail bond paperwork just shows that you have interest in that fugitive because you've been hired on by the bail company to whom the fugitive is obliged under a contractual agreement that the fugitive has breached. All right, between the defendant, who is the fugitive, the bail company, and the courts, and the insurance company that issued the bond to the bail company to secure the release of the fugitive. So it gets kind of complicating, but I have to constantly repeat this just to reinforce that, so folks watching understand the way that bail bonds work. A bail bond is not a warrant, but can be seen as your probable cause to effect an arrest, as when bail is forfeited, it is a breach of contract between the defendant and all other parties of interest. So we already talked about that. Citizens arrest in California continued. So first and foremost, as a bounty hunter, you want to positively ID your fugitive before making an arrest. You want to positively ID your fugitive before making an arrest. You want to positively ID your fugitive before making an arrest. Why? Because you want to make sure you're not making a false arrest, and that's happened very many times. And there's been cases, out of New York, where bounty hunters thought they had their fugitive, made the arrest, drove that fugitive all the way to Alabama, remanded their fugitive back into the custody of the courts, and then it was later verified that that fugitive was not a fugitive. That's enough to take out the bail company that hired you. You won't ever work as a bounty hunter ever again. You'll probably be brought up on criminal charges. you're supposed to know you have your person. You either do or you don't. Okay, you don't act on an assumption and say, well, you're just going to risk it because of the reward. It's really, the stakes are high and the margin of error is very little in bounty hunting. Margin of error should be none. No margin of error. Bounty hunters or any authorized person recovering a fugitive is acting as a private person and does not have any special powers which would otherwise give them arrest powers or peace officer status. All right? Persons bounty hunting may enter any house or dwelling to make an arrest so long as the offense is a felony. California PC 844. But let me just reinforce that previous part. Bounty hunters are acting as private persons, don't have any special powers. Okay, you don't have law enforcement or peace officer powers or powers of the officer of the court. You're not cops. You're a bounty hunter. It is a field that can be respected. It's a line of work that can be admired, and there can be honor and integrity there. But it's all how you treat the job. If you just put on a badge and run around with a gun and you're just hunting people down, breaking all sorts of laws, we'll get to that later in the presentation as to how not to bounty hunt. But you are not a peace officer, you are a private citizen. Okay. Persons bounty hunting may enter any house or dwelling to make an arrest so long as the offense is a felony. California Penal Code 844. That becomes a gray area due to Taylor versus Taintor, which is the non-binding precedent case that states that a bail agent or fugitive recovery persons can enter into a house where the fugitive is. It becomes a gray area, but we're going to sort through that and make that right. We're going to figure that out together. California PC 844 gives private citizens the authority to enter houses. But before we go into that, when a defendant skips bail and the original charge is a felony, the defendant will face an additional failure to appear or an FDA felony charge, and FDA misdemeanor if original charge is a misdemeanor. So if somebody skips bail on a felony charge, they just committed a felony. All right? So you know that your fugitive committed a felony by not showing up to court. In addition to the contractual agreement between the fugitive, bail company, and the courts, and so forth, now you know. So as a citizen, if you know that somebody is inside of a dwelling, even if it's not their own home, it's somebody else's, and they're a fugitive from justice, they have a felony warrant, and they violated and breached a contractual agreement with your employer, the bail company, right? You can enter that dwelling to effect an arrest. This is why it's also good to know if even somebody that's out on a misdemeanor may have additional warrants for felonies, because then as a citizen you can effect an arrest because they're wanted on a felony charge. They're committing a felony. So even if their agreement with the bail company for the bail company to bail them out was on a misdemeanor charge, if they have additional felony warrants and you're a bounty hunter, you can enter that dwelling if you know they're in there. It makes your job that much easier. But keep in mind, when you're going into other people's houses and private property, people tend to take that to offense, even if you look like you're an authority figure. Even if you're a cop. I mean, still, you have to be very careful. So it's always best to get people in public. That minimizes the chances for liability. That minimizes lawsuits or any false allegations or accusations against you. It's always better to get somebody, a fugitive that you're investigating and looking to capture. It's better to get them in a public or common area rather than on private property, unless it's your private property or that of, an associate or the bail company. But that's up to you. California Penal Code 844, which gives private citizens the authority to enter houses, states that to make an arrest a private person if the offense is a felony, and in all cases a peace officer, but we're not going to worry about that because bounty hunters, bail agents, and private investigators are not peace officers, even though some may be peace officers in occupations separate to bounty hunting. When you're acting as a bounty hunter or fugitive recovery persons, you're a private citizen, even if you're an off-duty cop. May break open the door or window of the house in which the person to be arrested is, or in which they have reasonable grounds for believing the person to be, after having demanded admittance and explained the purpose for which admittance is desired. So if you're doing a fugitive recovery, common courtesy is always preferred, but you have to know the fugitive you're going after. There's other circumstances that are at play. So, if you know the person to be aggressive or something like that, you probably don't want to be as nice as you should. But something like knocking and saying fugitive recovery bail enforcement and then going through the door, if it's a high-risk warrant, if it's a felony warrant or a felony bond, right? If that's what it takes. But keep in mind, you don't want to cause more damage than what the reward of the bond is worth to you, and you don't want to create a situation unnecessarily which could easily be avoided. So keep that in mind as bounty hunters. Don't go all in gun-ho trying to go after fugitives unless you know that the person has the active warrant, you can get them, and that's the only way to go about a situation because you've tried everything else. With bounty hunting, the situation is always time sensitive. So here's another thing before we proceed. The clock is always ticking for bounty hunters. So every moment, is precious. If there's an opportunity in remanding a fugitive and bounty hunters see that opportunity, the less time they have, right? Because once that clock runs out, the reward is no longer there. You just let down the bail company that hired you, right? Who's going to then have to pay the full bail amount to the courts if you don't get the fugitive back in custody in time. So this is where bounty hunters get really desperate. When you see bounty hunters engaging in certain activities and behavior which is just outright illegal, questionable would be an understatement. That's why. Because they really want that reward, and they've probably invested a lot of time and energy into going after a fugitive. And just like criminals get desperate, bounty hunters, people get desperate when their clock is ticking and they have to either get their fugitive or risk losing all that money and all that time and energy that they spent investigating. So that's oftentimes when we see situations in bounty hunting go bad, that's what it is. There's a lot of energy and people are just really amped up and excited, and you have to really learn how to control that as a bounty hunter. You can't let your adrenaline take over and start thinking you're a movie character, all right? In an action film, it doesn't work that way. Taylor versus Taintor states, if necessary, person pursuing a fugitive to whom the fugitive is contractually obliged may break and enter into the house for that purpose. But PC 1299.09 requires compliance with PC 844 in respect to entering dwellings for the purpose of fugitive recovery. So it is a gray area. However, if the bond paperwork that the fugitive signed lists an address where that fugitive is at, chances are there's wording on that bond paperwork, and every company does it differently, but in short, a defendant is agreeing that you'll go into their house to arrest them, misdemeanor or felony. They agreed to that. If they didn't want to bail out of jail, they don't sign the bond paperwork. So contractually, you're not wrong for entering in a house, even on a misdemeanor warrant, of a fugitive who's agreed to that, because they've consented. You can enter any dwelling if you have consent from the property owner. See? So they've consented ahead of time. They signed that bond paperwork and said that even on a misdemeanor warrant or a bond, if they don't show up, the bail agent or their representatives can come into that address listed on the bond paperwork, even if it's a misdemeanor, and go into that dwelling for the purpose of arresting the fugitive and delivering him back into the custody of the courts. That is legal because it's a contractual agreement and it's consensual. So in addition to that, what I would like to say that in most cases, if you know you're not dealing with somebody violent and it's somebody that you are dealing with frequently because they're in and out of jail and the bail company you work for just so happens to bail them out every time, then you have established that rapport. So you don't have to be all, Mr. or Mrs. SWAT team going in after people. You can politely knock on their door, ask to speak with them, and at which point work and strive towards getting their consent, because that's usually the best case scenario, unless you're dealing with just someone hostile or you don't know the person, you don't have that rapport. Then you go by the book legally, but always err on the side of safety. No amount of money is worth the risk of injury or even worse. So somebody is just a violent, vicious felon and they're out there and they're just a gangster of all gangsters. You want to always be cautious, all right? Because there's been one too many cases of good bounty hunters getting themselves hurt or even worse because they didn't err on the side of safety. They wanted to go in and get their guy or girl or whoever and found themselves in a situation that nobody wearing a badge and gun wants to be in. It's just a bad predicament. So, California Penal Code, Section 838, a magistrate may orally order a peace officer or private person to arrest anyone committing or attempting to commit a public offense in the presence of such magistrate. Bounty hunters, bail agents, and private investigators don't have to worry about that. But California Penal Code Section 839 states, any person making an arrest may orally summon as many persons as he deems necessary to aid him therein. So, if you're a bounty hunter, and you're by yourself, maybe, okay? And you're going after someone who's your fugitive, and they start kicking your ass. You can summon other persons, other civilians or citizens to aid you in the arrest of a fugitive. However, that can in and of itself become a liability issue for you later on down the line when one of those citizens decides to turn around and sue you because they got hurt helping you arrest a fugitive. So be very careful. But we're just going over citizens arrest in California and all the things you need to know. The better and more familiar you become with the laws and the nuances of laws, not just in California, but federal laws and other states as well. If you plan on going into other states to bounty hunt, the better it is going to be for you. More professional you're going to be, and knowledge is power. Knowledge is the key, right? So citizens making a citizen's arrest are not required to notify the arrested of their Miranda rights. We talked about that previously, because bounty hunters are not required to read fugitives their Miranda rights. Bounty hunters are acting as citizens, right? You're in a civilian capacity. So you want to remember, you're not a cop, so you don't have to tell anybody their Miranda rights. But you do want to be courteous and advise your fugitive that they skipped on bail. You work for the bail bondsman or bail company. You're there to remand them back into the custody of the courts, and they should know that. Any evidence obtained during a citizen's arrest can be used by law enforcement to bring defendants up on additional charges, and even when obtained without a warrant, can be introduced into court. That doesn't really matter, but that's just something to keep in mind, that if you're engaged in bounty hunting and incidental to your arrest of a fugitive, you find paraphernalia or illegal objects like firearms or weapons, whatever the case may be, whether it's upon the person or in a dwelling where they're at, you want to notify law enforcement and refer that to them, because they may want to bring up additional charges against the fugitive for that. So